The Supreme Court is hearing arguments on President Trump's push to end birthright citizenship. The consequences could go well beyond the scope of this one case that they are hearing. CNN's Paula Reed is outside the court. Paula, tell us, first of all, the highlights of what we've heard so far in English, which is a bit different from what our viewers have been hearing, unless they are, our lawyers are very much, familiar with the language of Supreme Court arguments, but also the big picture of what this could mean.
Dana, I speak fluent justice, and I like to think I speak fluent
Perfect.
TV.
You're
so
exactly the translator we need.
The stakes are really high for President Trump here, because what happens in this case could determine how quickly and effectively he can implement his agenda through executive orders. Because the focus here today is on judicial power and whether one judge anywhere in the country should have the power to block a policy for the entire country, something called a nationwide injunction. Now, these have been imposed against every modern president, but none more than President Trump, because he does so many things through executive order. He has already issued a record more than 200 executive orders, and they've been blocked by these injunctions 49 times. Now, today's case is specifically focused on his executive order ending birthright citizenship. So the right that if you were born in this country, even if your parents are not U.S. citizens, that you are a citizen. And the challengers argue that this is exactly why you do need one consistent policy for the entire country. So if a judge is going to block this, you don't want a patchwork, because they argue it will create chaos. And Justice Kagan, she really hammered President Trump's lawyer, John Sauer, on this issue. Let's take a listen to what she said.
Let's just assume you're down. How do we get to that result? Does every single person that is affected by this EO have to bring their own suit? Are there alternatives? How long does it take? How do we get to the result that there is a single rule of citizenship that is the rule that we've historically applied, rather than the rule that the EO would have us do?
It is clear that the liberal justices are not buying this argument from the Trump administration, but they just need 5 conservative justices to agree that not only are these nationwide injunctions being abused, that they are in some way usurping the power that is supposed to be held by the president or by the legislative branch. And Dana, based on the questions that we heard today, it does appear that the Trump administration may have enough justices to either limit or eliminate these nationwide injunctions. And I just want to note, this is not specifically a Trump issue. The past 5 Justice Departments have all opposed nationwide injunctions and said, look, this is a problem that needs to be addressed. And look, we'll see what the justices have to say about this when they issue their opinion, likely next month.
Yeah, I mean, President Biden, for example, signed several executive orders that were challenged, and he didn't want his to be overturned in a nationwide fashion either. So that's a really important point. Thank you so much, Paula. I know you'll keep listening. We'll get back to you. And I'm joined here by a terrific group of reporters and analysts: CNN's Priscilla Alvarez, Isaac Dovere of CNN, Jamie Gingell as well, and CNN Supreme Court analyst Steve Vladeck. Steve, I'm going to start with you. Take it away about your big picture overview.
I mean, it's hard to convey briefly just how big a deal the technical, nerdy, procedural issue in these cases is, but it really reduces to the question of whether, when the president does something that perhaps we all agree is unlawful, does every single person who's affected have to bring a lawsuit? Or at least do you have to have a series of lawsuits on behalf of classes of everyone who's affected? Or can you have one, or in this case, 3 lawsuits that tee the issue up to the Supreme Court, that give the Supreme Court a chance to say, this is unlawful, you can't do that? Everyone agrees that once the Supreme Court says this is unlawful, it's a rule for the whole country, and it's a rule that protects everybody. But the fight is over what happens until then. And it takes 2, 3, 4 years for cases to get to the Supreme Court. And so the question is, during that interim period, are we really going to make every single person bring their own case or be part of someone else's case? Or are we going to allow for these kinds of nationwide lawsuits? Dana, the reason why that matters is not just for birthright citizenship, right? So in the birthright citizenship case, you've got 22 states that are plaintiffs, but you have 28 that are not. You have 5 individual named plaintiffs and 1 organization that represents, maybe a couple 100,000 people. But that's not going to cover anywhere close to all of the people who could be affected by this policy. are they going to now have to go bring their own lawsuits? And so the implications here are not substantive. The court is not about to say this policy is okay, but the ruling might have the same effect for so many people.
Let me just stick with you for 1 second, because as we were listening, we were talking about the patchwork. And 22 states sued. I believe we have a map showing this. So if you could explain, if the court goes the way it sounds just from the way the conservative justices are asking their questions, we don't know how it ultimately would go, but if they say no to a nationwide injunction, and we end up with a patchwork just on this issue alone, on whether or not if an undocumented immigrant has a baby.
Say in Texas.
Say in Texas, which is obviously, you see, not colored in there. It's a red state. They don't want to have anything to do with this lawsuit. What happens? What's the difference between the baby born in Texas versus right next door in New Mexico?
So the baby born in Texas, unless their parents are part of one of those lawsuits in one of those other states, and maybe they could be, but unless they are, the baby born in Texas is not a citizen. The baby born in Texas is subject to removal under our immigration laws. The baby born in Texas is not eligible for an array of medical benefits that any citizen would be. And that's going to vary, Dana, not just state by state. It's going to vary based on, are you a member of the particular immigrant rights group that brought one of these lawsuits, CASA, or are you not? Are we going to require the parents in the hospital to produce their CASA membership card? So, there are good arguments for why lower courts have gotten too happy, too sort of aggressive in issuing nationwide injunctions in the last few presidencies. But there's also something unique on the other side of the equation, which is a president who, whether you think what he's doing is lawful or not, is doing more than any of his predecessors, when, as in this case, there are serious arguments that it's patently unlawful under settled precedent. And when you have the very real concern that that's not going to matter, because in the short term, you're going to have hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans or non-citizens whose kids should be Americans who aren't allowed to benefit from these other more specific court rulings.
And I want you to come in, but I just want to also tell our viewers that the hearing is over. They've adjourned, and so now we're just going to wait to see what the Supreme Court decides.
We already have a bit of an example as to what it would look like if there weren't these nationwide injunctions. And I'll tell you what that is. With the Alien Enemies Act, that sweeping wartime authority that the president has wanted to use to swiftly remove undocumented immigrants, we are seeing a patchwork of cases across the country because those judges have not been issuing nationwide injunctions. So I have been following multiple cases on multiple dockets, and this has become a tricky issue for all of these groups because, for example, there was a judge in one district of Texas that said, no one in my district can be removed under this authority. Except for in another district, there wasn't that ruling. So detainees were moved to that district. And then there was another emergency filing and another evening that said, no, now we need to address this. So what we've already started to see what a world like this could look like on this very particular issue because these multiple districts are ruling only for their district. So if that individual's moved somewhere else, then in that area, they could be removed. And it has been really confusing for a lot of attorneys. It's been confusing for the detainees. And it has led to a lot of late nights on
Well,
it
it required the Supreme Court to step back in.
Yeah.
So the reason why you couldn't have had a nationwide, the plaintiffs tried a nationwide challenge to the Alien Enemy Act proclamation. That was the case that was before Chief Judge Boasberg here in D.C. The Supreme Court on April 7th says, no, you can't do this as a nationwide suit. You got to go through district by district litigation. In any other administration, that would not have been that huge of a difference because the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security would have said, okay, but we see the writing on the wall. We understand that we have to follow due process. Priscilla's exactly right. What the Trump administration did is say, okay, let's play a shell game. Let's move people into the districts where we haven't lost yet.
Yep.
And the problem is that experience should give us pause.
The key here is the shell. Well, one of the many keys here is the shell game. And Jamie, just on the politics of this isn't haphazard inside the Trump Justice Department, inside the White House. This is the kind of strategy that Trump world spent 4 years when Biden was in the White House mapping out.
Right. You stole my word. It is the strategy, and beyond the confusion and the chaos, I think we also have to take a look at this with the words judicial power. So in so many of these cases, President Trump has used very effectively speed as a weapon. And numbers, 200 executive orders, all of these actions. So if you talk to, legal scholars or political people who are concerned about what he's doing, this is a time they will say the red light is blinking, 5-alarm fire. What is an effective check and balance on President Trump? The Republican Congress is not going to stop him. So the fact that this goes to the point of judicial power and these courts, people have been looking at the courts and judges and saying, it's on you. And now, depending on how the Supreme Court rules,
It's going to be on all of them.
yeah.